Welcome to the second of 3 Leadership Insights sessions, which we, UK Green Building Council, are hosting here at Ecobuild. We are the lead partner of Ecobuild once again this year, and unsurprisingly, perhaps, we're most particularly interested in the eco bit of Ecobuild. So these sessions are really looking at leadership, and in this case in particular today, at innovative design. Leadership is really central to our mission at UK Green Building Council. We're a charity and a membership organisation whose mission is to radically improve the sustainability of the built environment. So no small task there, and we really perceive leadership in all its guises to be absolutely crucial to that. We know we won't achieve that mission without cultivating leadership at every link in the chain. And when I talk about leadership in that sense, I mean industry leadership, organisational leadership, and also personal leadership, individual leadership as well. Let's face it, we're not seeing a huge amount of political leadership at the moment on this topic. We're putting ever more emphasis on understanding what constitutes leadership from a sustainable built environment perspective, and that's really what this session is all about. Now, as Will said, the conference theme today is architecture. So we've curated the session and our speakers specifically around to bring insights around the sort of the design agenda, as it were. We've got some current design and development leaders, some leading sustainability thinkers, and also a future leader, all drawn from UK Green Building Council's broad membership base. So, on that note, let me introduce the panellists. Immediately to my right, we have Bennetts, who's Director of Bennetts Associates, a professional architectural practice that has sustainable design and behaviour as a guiding principle of the practice. Next to Rab, we have Paul Williams, who is Director of Derwent London, one of London's most innovative office specialists, well known for its design-led philosophy and its creative approach to development. Next to Paul, we have Marc Stringa, who's a principal at AECOM, the multidisciplinary design and engineering practice, and Marc advises on complex urban development projects, amongst other things. And next to Marc, we have Lydia Dutton, who's a project manager for Argent and an alumni of UK Green Building Council's Future Leaders Programme. So welcome to you all, and thanks for joining. Before I pass over to the panellists to give us their thoughts, I thought I'd kick us off with a few challenges as we see them at UK-GBC in respect of design and innovative design in particular. So first and foremost, I've listed there the fragmentation of responsibility within the industry. When I first started working on sustainable buildings, which was quite a long time ago in the 90s, my then chairman, Professor Cadman, coined a phrase which is still in usage today, which was the vicious circle of blame. You may have heard it in the context of sustainability in the built environment, and it's still very, very relevant, and I think captures very well the sort of passing of the buck that happens between developer, investor, designer, contractor, and occupier, and this continuous sort of, well, it's not quite, I would do it if I were asked, but I haven't been asked, so I won't. There's this sort of vicious circle of blame, and when it comes to driving up environmental standards in particular, there is this sort of general tendency to pass to blame others for the failure in the system, effectively. So I'd say that's one key challenge. Rather contentiously, perhaps, I've listed there as the second one, the suggestion that architecture has succumbed to a bit of a celebrity culture and at times has gone down a slightly more egocentric route, whereby the design personality and the aesthetics sometimes overtake the imperative to put people at the heart of the design process, and not to mention planet. So we've ended up with sort of landmark buildings that don't always necessarily work for people inside them or using them or the environment around them. The third one there is the buzzword on everyone's minds at the moment. There were several sessions here today and yesterday around the performance gap. So this is the difference between the design intent of a building and the operational performance of buildings in use. Now, recent studies have come up with the suggestion that in-use energy consumption can be 5 to 10 times higher than the actual intended compliance calculations that were carried out during the design phase. And there's a huge amount of work going on to understand and unpick that. So I think this is a really significant challenge, particularly not just from a reputational perspective. It sort of conjures up the kind of Volkswagen reputational risk, but also it sort of undermines the consumer confidence in the ultimate product. Fourth, I'd highlight just the sheer complexity of the built environment. We obviously, the market focuses on assets, and investment decisions are made at the asset level. But of course, when it comes to solving some of the more complex and interdisciplinary sustainability challenges, we need to look beyond the building and more at the neighborhood or community or indeed city scale. So it's hard to find the custodians and the owners of those sorts of decisions, you know, who is effectively responsible for that systems thinking becomes quite challenging to identify. And then last, but by no means least, I'd flag the kind of rapid evolution of technology and construction methods and materials and so on, which can have the effect of accelerating obsolescence, of course, within the built environment. But at worst, they would lead to sort of more of a risk-averse culture, restricting innovation because we're not necessarily sure that these things are here to last. No pressure, panel, but a few sort of chunky challenges there for you to get stuck into. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask each of the panelists to come up, give us 5 minutes or so of their reflections on those challenges, and then we're going to open up for a Q&A, and I'll be wanting to get your questions in there as well. So, Rab, if I could kick off with you.
Thank you.
And the clicker's just next and back.
Okay, let's hope this button works. Right, now, Bennetts Associates, some of you might know us, some of you might not. We're a very general architectural practice, and we do universities and offices and public buildings and hotels. And the picture on the top right there is one of our theatres. It was opened last night, in fact, for the first night of Motown in the West End. So if you get down there and you want to see a show, it's a cracking good show. Now, that's just my naked plug for the moment. Now, the point of showing you these slides is I'm going to rattle through quite a lot of slides in 5 minutes. And the purpose is to show that there's a consistent theme through all of them based on simple principles that I started working on as a young graduate at Arup Associates way back in the late 70s, early 80s. So I've been looking at sustainability, as it's now called, it wasn't then, as it's now called, for quite a long time. And I've found that those principles still hold good, and we still need to analyze them, and we can still make them work. Now, the first building we did for Bennetts Associates was this PowerGen headquarters in Coventry, and it identified as the key principles: thermal mass, natural ventilation, or at least an appropriate ventilation system, solar control. It was a robust building, it functioned very well. We went back to see it last year. It's still doing extremely well, and as you can see, it's 25 years old, well, 25 years since we started the design process, and it still works. And that's that point about the performance gap. We know that it works. We then went on to do buildings in Edinburgh for John Menzies, then BT alongside it on the same principles, refining it all the time. Then Wessex Water in Bath, which took on principles of water usage, biodiversity, as well as low carbon, and that works, and we've been back to see that building as well over the years. Same principles, but using less materials, trying to make it low embodied carbon as well as low operational carbon, and that's a terribly significant part of the equation nowadays. We then applied principles that we developed for offices to other building types because we knew that they worked by this time. So we won a competition to do the Jubilee Library in Brighton, and it got shortlisted for the Sterling Prize. Again, we've measured it, we've got the figures. It's not quite as good as we thought it was going to be, and we've got the reasons for that, and part of the reason is it's heavily used. It actually is very busy in the evenings, which was not planned at all, with lots of students coming in and plugging in their laptops. So, you know, buildings have got to be robust enough to cope with that. It's still a low carbon building. We've applied the principles to big commercial developments, such as this enormous scheme for land securities. It's over 1 million square feet of space in 4 buildings in the center of the City of London. And again, we applied principles of low tech, robust buildings, air on the floor, exposed thermal mass, solar shading, and kept refining it and refining it and refining to make sure it was better each time we did it. We then started using less aluminium in order to build the buildings because it's actually energy intensive as a material, so we used timber to clad the building and use as a sun shading, which was very interesting. And we applied the buildings in a northern climate once more in Edinburgh for a university. So here's a building in Edinburgh with no sun shading other than good glass, got less glass than other buildings, a lot of thermal mass, and of course it's a university building. And we started applying it to refurbishments. We got interested when we came across this building in Winchester, which is a shocking building from the 1960s. Rather than knock it down, we said, can we not keep the structure and refurbish it? And that's in fact what we did. We found it was extremely low carbon to do that. We could actually save 8,000 tons of material in the refurbishment of the building by retaining the concrete, and it turned out to be a very pleasant space. And the local council, it's actually Hampshire County Council, did not have to move, which they might have had to do otherwise. We apply that to our theatres too. Even the theatres are quite low energy. Air coming from below the seats, renewable energy where we can, using the thermal mass, return air to retake the heat out of the air and so on. It's not rocket science, it's just simple science, simple technology, which we know works. We're now doing our 4th building on King's Cross development, which is a huge scheme. And they're in a different league, frankly, because they have their own power plant and they can produce low carbon energy on the spot. And that tips the buildings from BREEAM Excellent into BREEAM Outstanding. Here's the first one. That's the one we're doing for Camden Council. It was finished a year or so ago. It did get BREEAM Outstanding. I've just been told this morning it won this year's BREEAM Top Award last night, which I didn't know until I was on the train coming across this morning. It's got swimming pool in the basement, public areas, offices, and so on. We're doing one for Derwent, which is handed over, now being fitted out. It was finished at the back end of last year, and that again has got low carbon principles, mainly because the client supports it and they believe in it, and that's really where we have to get started. We have to know that the client's behind what we're doing too. It's got a courtyard, it's got opening windows, it's got underfloor ventilation and so on. Another one at King's Cross I won't dwell on. It's a very interesting building in a train shed that was at the north of the site, built in 1850, and we're converting it into space for Waitrose. If you want to go do your shopping, it's already there. And for Guardian space, we're going to occupy the rest of the building as a media hub. Again, very low-tech principles. We're then moving on to future projects. We're doing a timber frame building for renewable energy systems in Watford. So we're trying to get the embodied carbon down as much as we possibly can. We're doing a similar building with a timber structure over the roof for Jaguar Land Rover up in Warwickshire, an enormous project which is just about to go in for planning. So you can see the influence of materiality on a building for a car manufacturer who are actually genuinely interested in sustainability, which is good. Back on King's Cross, we're doing another big building. I won't bore you with the details, but you get the drift. We're doing it again and again and again, and then we measure the buildings systematically. Now, this is a chart from some years ago. I don't propose that you read the figures. You'll not see them from where you are, but it's a way of evaluating building against building, the different energy users like lighting, air handling, and so on, and measuring them against certificate values from the green to the red. And we try to do that every time. It's quite difficult to do because not all the engineers agree with each other. And we're now trying to get into embodied carbon, which is with the help of specialists like Simon Sturgis. And as you can see from this pie chart, we're now finding that in the lifetime cycle of a building, embodied carbon is actually greater than the low carbon buildings where the operational carbon is low. And finally, a couple of slides of our own studio. That's our corporate headquarters as it was in 2000. We refurbished it and tried to use the same principles in our own workspace. We extended it in 2013. We've then used reporting mechanisms like the Global Reporting Initiative to measure everything that we do, including transport, commuting, paper, water, energy, and so on. So we practice what we preach. And this is a kind of simplified bullet point. The formatting's gone slightly awry here, but never mind. We're starting with architectural excellence. We've got RIBA awards for all of the buildings that you saw that have been entered for RIBA awards. The most recent ones we haven't entered yet. Now that's important because if we don't get architectural quality out of this, we're wasting our time. And you can see the other ones: continuous improvement, analysis, big objective, disseminating the information, and finally, and absolutely not the least, we practice, I think, what we preach. That's probably enough for now. Thank you.
Thanks, Rab. A very happy card as well. Took us a long time to get our scheme off the ground, but a really interesting green building in Chancery Lane. I'm going to talk to you a bit about Derwent. A bit of boring stuff to start with. I've been with the business 33 years. I started in 1983, and we had about £3 million worth of assets in central London. I think there were 4 of us, and suddenly we've turned into sort of £5 billion and 6 million square feet. We invest in London. We're generally investor refurbishers rather than developers, and that's a slide of our villages. We always say to our tenants, our customers, that we've got the ultimate environmental policy. If we can't walk to a building, we're not interested. So we generally work in the West End and in what we call the tech, excuse me, the tech belt. We did once go as far west as Hammersmith, but we thought that was miles away. We've got some property in Shoreditch as well, but we're a great believer in London. I thought we'd just do a bit of blast from the past. We're really investor refurbishers. We like working with existing buildings. We like changing them from the sow's ears into the silk purses. And there used to be a property maxim of location, location, location. And I think our maxim is design, design, and design. And both those examples are the Angel building, which is the top left, and the T building, which is the bottom left. These were buildings that were underutilised and unloved. Now, the Angel building was developed in 1984 and pre-let to BT. We merged in 2007. We looked at that building and we thought to ourselves, do we knock down a rather unloved 1980s brutalist building that everyone hated, particularly the planners, or do we work with it and try and develop something really beautiful? And we worked with the building, we extended it, we worked with the HMM. Unfortunately, both Rab and I got to the Sterling Prize finalists that year. We both lost, didn't we? To a great winner, but to get an office building to the Sterling Prize, for us, was a major achievement. We were absolutely delighted. And there it's about the joy of space, about creating volume and light, and also green building. So things like opening windows don't seal your building, a displacement air conditioning system, passive cooling, giving tenants control of lights. Now, the T building is an interesting building. That was built originally for Lipton Tea back in the 1930s, and that's a picture of actually being built. We bought it in 2000 when it was used really for storage. I think there were about 3 people employed in the building. It's pretty unloved. Shoreditch at the time was pretty unloved and not particularly friendly. We won permission to convert it into B1 offices. We've now got 3,000 people working there. We've got incubators, we've got accelerators, we've got a hotel, we've got a Shoreditch house, we've got a swimming pool. And it's got big bones, it's got great bones. We're using the structure of the building to help with its energy efficiency. A lot of it is centrally heated rather than cooled, and where people want it cooled, we've got some heat exchangers, heat from the south and the north, all that stuff. We sort of christened it green tea. So we like working with our existing stock. Now, White Collar Factory, this is a site that we own on the corner of Old Street Roundabout, and there were some pretty unloved 1960s buildings, and this was an opportunity really to start again. And we did something very unusual for a developer, stroke landlord. We actually asked our tenants, our customers, what they wanted from their buildings. So we had a tenant forum. They came in for a bit of free lunch, and a few of the funny ones asked for reduced rents and reduced service charge, but we obviously dismissed that. But what they really wanted is some adaptability and some control. And we've long felt that buildings are becoming too sophisticated, they're too controlled, they're too over-engineered, and they're not joyous enough. And it's a bit like a BMW car or a Mercedes car. There's loads of facilities, you don't really need them, but what we want to do is get back to basics and understand how best do people occupy buildings and how we can use a building in order to improve not only their efficiency, but also their health and well-being. So we were very early into active by design. We were very keen to have a scheme that was a passive cooling system, that you could use, open the windows, have mixed mode. And we also very keen to create a campus where we'd have different tenants for different age groups, different experiences, working on different models. So we're working with our team. We kept the low-rise buildings, which are on your left, and we put a tower of 15 stories. Now we're on site at the moment with Brookfield, and it's letting up very well. So I would need my glasses now because there's no screen on here, but we came up with really 5 principles. Tall ceilings. We put floor-to-ceiling height here of 3.5 metres. If we squeeze the floors like every other developer would do, we'd probably get 1 or 2 more floors into the development. We'd have 17 stories rather than 15 stories, but we thought that was wrong. We wanted to create more good space, and we thought, well, people will pay more money for better space, so actually our returns would be even greater if we create something that is interesting and imaginative. And going back to this tenant forum, what we wanted to do is give tenants the ability to change things overnight, without licenses, without authority, without worrying about warranties, and without dilapidations. So if you look at the way tenants are changing their work pattern over the years, they change fantastically fast. And they're working with project groups, they're sharing offices, so we don't really care who's in our building. We're happy for tenants to share with different types of companies, project space, as long as we get it back at the end. And we're quite happy for tenants to change the scheme and change the space without worrying about warranties and licenses. So we did away with fan coils, which we don't greatly like, and we did away with ceilings, which we don't like, and we came up with what we christened as concrete core cooling, which is, it does what it says on the tin, and the pipes were embedded within the concrete, and then we're using the energy within the building, within the concrete slab, to help cool the space. With 3.5 metre floor to ceiling heights, if the air gets a bit warmer at the top of the ceiling, who really cares? Because no one, not even the Dutch, are 3.5 metres tall. So again, we thought of that too. So again, for the smart servicing, and also we wanted to run the building smartly. So we're going to have a traffic light system. So for days it is not too hot, we'll turn the cooling off, open the windows. For some efficiency. We'll design it to be very efficient for a tenant, to occupy 1 to 8. And we'll also design it for hopefully a BREEAM outstanding. I know that Rab's got one, but we'd like one as well, because I think these things are important. So just the 5 principles. As I said, high ceilings, 3.5 metres. The concrete core cooling, which is a passive system. Windows that open. People don't really want sealed buildings, even in a noisy environment like Old Street. We did a test with Arup to look at the noise coming through. On the first floor it's a bit noisy, but you're in a vibrant city. Flexible occupation, ability to sublet, and it stays cool and stays warm. And most importantly, the carbon is reduced, and also the energy consumption for tenants is much reduced, as is their fit out. But it's not just about designing really interesting buildings that work well initially. It's how you manage your buildings going forward. You know, too many buildings get a great EPC, get a great BREEAM rating, and then it's sold off, and the people running the building don't really care how it's run. So you end up having a situation where a building is being run badly, even though it's designed to good standards. So we're constantly monitoring our electrical consumption, our water consumption, our gas consumption. We're working with our tenants. We're having no lift days. We're having awards for people that actually consume the least electricity. You've got to work your buildings hard, make sure you engage with your tenants, engage with your customers, because that's what it's all about. So anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Paul. Marc. It's for you, Paul.
Hi, excuse me. I'm Marc Stringa from AECOM. I head up the Strategic Planning and Design Group. We are entrusted by the company to develop city and regional plans within the EMEA region. We've currently finished a few projects, mainly in the Middle East, such as the new city plan for Jeddah, some work we've been doing in the Emirates, such as a new plan for Dubai post the crash. So it's all large-scale work. The big question with the size of the thinking, particularly within a multidisciplinary environment, is not necessarily the combination of the multidisciplinary pieces through a number of different areas of expertise, such as transport, infrastructure, housing, environment, etc. It's really understanding what each component means. So if you look at these two smallest units, a simple bolt on the left, a seed on the right, it's actually a really complicated discussion about what is the bolt, what is the material, where does it fit, what sort of seed is it, how does it germinate, does it require fire, and what is the context of that particular seed. If you then extrapolate that to the sort of emerging component parts, the component part is maybe a little bit clunky in the way that we talk about it, but you see on the left a technical innovation 80 years ago that allowed us to ride further with less effort. Still used today. You look at the latest stuff, it's still the stuff that Campagnolo developed in 1930. On the right, you start to see the leaves of a tree. In this particular instance, they provide an economy around a type of oil. They provide a major risk around fire, and they provide a permanence of coverage across the whole year. As a basic element, you assemble those pieces, and what does it mean? It means that we start to get an environmental system that we need to be responsive to, or that we need to understand what it is before we actually take some decisions on the extra large scale, on the city scale, and the regional scale. Or we have a vehicle that we can use. That asks another question: who's going to use it, where, how far, and how does that all come together? I'm really talking about, I think, more so information that we need to make decisions around. Then there's the other component, which is the data to understand how the performance of those various pieces come together when you look at systems. So if we look at, on the left, a Strava heat map. Strava is a great resource for those cyclists amongst you who sort of get out there and do their thing, but it also gives us some really false information. So this particular map is a heat map that in isolation would identify a series of routes, more popular routes, but actually what it does say is that at a particular point in time there was a particular event that lit up a particular route. So if you're investing, a government, and investing in that particular area and don't have the right data, then you're heading down a path where your public investment is not able to be optimised. On the right-hand side is a plot of open space in London. If you were to turn on the rivers that existed within the valley, they don't necessarily align with the open space structure that's in London at the moment. So all the covered rivers such as the Effra and the Fleet, etc., could also perform a fantastic role in water management in the broader city at a metropolitan scale. And so really the conversation around where are we going in terms of sustainability, let's use it that word, or Rossi in the 60s coined a term, the permanence of the plan at a different scale, is the embodiment of information for a singular point, and being able to take all of that information and reduce it. It's an incredibly complex conversation to generate a plan for a city that then kicks off a whole bunch of public investment that then gives certainty to investors where they should put their money into to provide housing, etc., and whether employers want to invest in that particular city. But if we don't have a cogent and clear story, then we don't have the ability to continue on a trajectory that's planned and organised. And the work that we've been doing is really about trying to reduce. There's a question about who is responsible for all of this, and usually it's entrusted to government agencies, but individually we have a responsibility to all take ownership of decisions, to then be able to understand within a direction for a plan where we individually fit into that, and as a broader group. The work in 47 that was done by the Abercrombie plan led the city for 40 years, and I think London is now struggling to go to the next step, and that integration is really the contribution that our work is making to the bigger sustainability question.
Thank you. Thanks, Marc. Lydia. Last but by no means least.
Hello, everyone. First of all, I'd just like to say a big thank you to Julie and the UK-GBC for inviting me to speak today. I'm representing the future leaders, and we now have over 50 alumni and a number in the room, so hopefully I'll represent as well as I can. I've actually been asked to step up and share my thoughts around innovation and design, but with a twist about breakthrough innovation, going beyond the incremental changes that are happening in design at the moment to actually what are the big breakthrough opportunities that we can have within the industry. Now, I want actually this presentation to be a call to action to everyone in the room, really, to actually leave here, go back to your organisations and challenge the status quo, the systems that we have, the processes that we have and the business models do fundamentally need to have a paradigm shift to actually move us forwards in battling the climate change agenda at the moment. So hopefully, small challenge for me in the next 5 minutes, but if you bear with me, I'll give it a go. I just wanted to start with leadership. We've had 3 presentations from organisations that are actually taking a leadership role in sustainability. One of the aspects around leadership is actually having that vision and that clarity of ideas as to where you're wanting to get to. I don't think it necessarily means you know how you're going to get there. I brought up this slide here of Kennedy in 1961, identifying that within 10 years he wanted to be on the moon. I don't think he had any idea how on earth he'd get people to the moon. That's not for him to think about, but he set that challenge. And that's really what we need to be doing in the industry at the moment, is setting that challenge for ourselves around sustainability and design and innovation. One of the other aspects I wanted to bring out from a leadership perspective is the piece around having and creating a culture within an organisation to drive innovation and enable people to make to have failings and to go wrong on projects, but enable that to happen quickly and fast so that you can actually build up again and re-go on some new innovative designs. I had the privilege last night of being at the UK Green Building Council Leaders Network dinner, which was bringing together 100 or so leaders of the green building agenda in the UK, and it was really inspirational to be party to conversations from CEOs, CFOs, managing directors of businesses that really want to drive change in the UK and globally. Now, this is my really subtle link to Queen. I was going to have the picture of Freddie Mercury up on, anyway, he's not in a miniskirt on my screen at the moment. But this is about actually wanting to break free from the status quo. It's not about that incremental design. I think one quote that I wanted to invigorate you with is, the difficulty lies not so much in developing new ideas as escaping the old ones. That's John Maynard Keynes, an economist. But actually, what is it that we need to be doing? The Future Leaders Programme was all about trying to understand what the problems were in the industry at the moment to come out with breakthrough new solutions. Now, sometimes during that process, it was a real challenge, but actually it was about trying not to get to a solution too quickly, really getting to grips with what the problem is. Defining the problem, identifying what the opportunities are, and then developing a concept and a new business model around sustainability. What's been really exciting coming out of the Future Leaders Programme is we actually have a project that I'm continuing to work on around developing a new business model and realising inherent value of materials in the buildings and looking at how that can start driving a new approach to bringing out value of the materials in the buildings themselves. One of the other aspects I wanted to bring out here as well is the need for collaboration. I think what's key in the presentation so far is that collaboration, both with the client, both with the design teams, with the architects, has been really key to making projects work. One of the other aspects is around diversity and getting a number of different parties in the room to have those conversations. So I think one of the things that's really important and really exciting to see here today and see at Ecobuild over these few days is actually young people getting interested or being interested in sustainability and driving businesses forwards. One of the other aspects of Kennedy suggesting that we get everyone to the moon in 10 years, the average age, I learned last week, I think, is that the average age of the NASA control room when they actually did get Neil Armstrong on the room was 28. It was 19-year-olds that had heard that inspirational, we're going to get someone on the moon, and actually actioned and made that happen. So it's really about bringing the new blood in the industry as well. There's been comments so far about the different scales of change. There's global, national, local, city-based as well. And I wanted to bring to everyone's attention this program called Sustainia. And it's really about bringing sustainable solutions across the globe together on an annual basis into something called Sustainia 100. This is where actually sustainable solutions have been found, and we need to be working together to drive forwards those solutions. It's a testament that really over the last 3 years, it's over 300 projects have been catalogued that can be taken forwards within our built design, within our building industry, as well as the fashion industry and the food industry to move towards a sustainable future. And from a city's perspective, we have C40 and Cities 100, which really brings together all of the opportunities within cities across the globe to think about innovation in design and the materials and the solutions that can come into the systems thinking. I wanted to leave you with the Eden Project and a quote from Buckminster Fuller, actually, around you never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. We no longer need to be reaching for the moon, but we need to be aiming for the sustainable urban future. Thank you.
Thank you. That's brilliant. That was great, thank you. I'm conscious of time, and I really want to give you guys the chance to ask questions. We've got about 10 minutes for Q&A. I've got lots of questions, so if you don't have any, don't worry. But let me, we've got a roving mic somewhere, just there. Any questions from the audience? There's one over here. Oh, there's 2 mics. And then there's one at the back as well. I'll take 2 at the same time, so that we can race through them. If you could tell us who you are and where you come from, that would be really helpful.
My name is Mina Hasman. I come from SOM. And my question is, a lot of the speakers have talked about the crucial essence of collaboration between the clients, the contractors, the builders, and the developers and the designers in every project. How do you overcome the challenge of working with clients that don't have any aspirations of sustainability?
Great question. I would have asked that myself. Let's take the second question, and then we'll take them both together.
Yes. Good morning. My name is Malachy McAleer. I'm here as a tutor from Ravensbourne College of Art with a bunch of students. I listened very carefully to all 5 speakers on your thesis about moving forward with a sustainable future, and not one of you, I think, mentioned renewables. And I just wondered, have we been fooling ourselves about renewables in this UK climate, that they just don't perform, as you suggested, Julie, at the very start, that the performance factor isn't working? And I just wondered, you know, planning authorities, building regulations are pushing us to renewables. I have a scheme where they want 35%, and we know we can't get it to work, and we're having to fudge the figures. So I just wonder if we could expand that debate.
Okay, we've got uncommitted clients and renewables. Well, why don't you start with the uncommitted clients question? I'm sure you've got lots of experience.
Right. To some extent, we rely on the sustainability agenda as a Trojan horse for other things, and so we don't go through everything with clients who don't seem to get it. We just get on and do it ourselves, and we prove the case as good design, and it happens to be sustainable while we're doing it as well. Obviously, we're trying to do rather better than the regulations. I mean, the regulations are there to stop clients and others dipping below a certain level, but we can achieve a lot more than the regulations by using good design as a proxy for achieving high levels of sustainability. So, for example, those nice shapes in the offices with thermal mass, good lighting, good ventilation, good daylight, they all achieve high levels of sustainability through low carbon. But they're actually sold sometimes on the basis that, well, it looks nice, or it's easy to build, or it's, you know, so you have to get up to all kinds of tricks to persuade people to do things they might not be completely conscious of. But clients are not hostile to sustainability. They're very willing when they have it properly explained. I've yet to come across a client who just doesn't care. So I don't think it's quite as gloomy as you might suggest.
Can I just push that one last, take Chair's license to push that a tiny bit more? Can you envisage a time when the reputational risk of a client's brief, if they weren't willing to go down this route, would be enough to sort of to turn the work down?
I think that's already there, if I'm honest. I mean, the biggest government mistake in recent years was getting rid of the display energy certificates. And we were already being asked by clients to get involved in their buildings, to make them better performers, because they were embarrassed at the thought of this certificate sitting in their entrance lobbies. I'm talking about big corporates, not small companies. And we're finding bigger companies worry about recruitment. Their new graduates are coming in, the first thing they ask is, what's your sustainability policy? So they have to have an answer. And they sometimes don't know, and they ring up their architect and say, what's our sustainability policy? So there's actually already a groundswell amongst quite big clients, and I suspect the smaller clients too, and there's certainly a groundswell in the younger generation of clients. I mean, bearing in mind the PowerGen building that I showed you, we were in our 30s, the client was in his 20s and her 20s at that time. So that was where the impetus for better buildings was coming from.
Okay.
So.
Paul, did you have something to add to that? As a committed client.
I mean, I think if you look at the decision makers today, they are what I call the Blue Peter sort of generation, where climate change and sustainability has been part of education for a considerable period of time. And when I go and see our tenants and customers, sustainability is very high up on their agenda. I remember when we pre-let to cancer research, we talked all about all sorts of soft issues ahead of talking about hard issues like lease length and rent. So we talked about where do we put their smokers and how we do a design by active by design. And we did a study for them on what we thought our BREEAM rating would be. And I got a call from my oppo saying, we don't believe your BREEAM rating. I think, oh dear, we're in trouble here. No, we think you've got a higher score than you're giving yourself. And so for their tick list, it was very high up. And I think for some responsible developers like ourselves, I think you just embrace it. It's all part of it. You can make buildings more interesting. It shouldn't be seen as a negative. It should be seen as a positive. You look at the enjoyment of the buildings that we've created for people like Burberry and Publicis and White Collar Factory. It's all about creating a better environment for the staff, which is more efficient, more enjoyable, and all the rest of it. And if you think about also how buildings are being used, I mean, I come from a generation, not that I ever did this, so you work 9 to 5. Work is 5 to 9 now, so you've got to create something that's responsible, works well. So I don't see it as a negativity. I see as a positive thing. You know, when we sit down and write our brief with our designers, it's part of the whole. It's not a tick list. It's not a list of thinking, well, we better do that because we're required to do it. It's what we want to do and what we think, more importantly, our tenants want us to do. So I'm not so negative about it. Renewables, I understand. I mean, part of our position is being, we want to try and cut out some of the carbon in buildings. We don't want to create sort of gas guzzlers. So one of the things, obviously, one of the problems in the UK is a lot of electricity is produced by non-renewables. So we wanted to create buildings that actually won't consume so much electricity, so much gas, and so have them a bit more efficient, and look to the future and have a long life cycle.
And Lydia and Marc, did you have a comment on the renewables question?
More so on a comment on the scale of work that I do.
Sorry, can you all hear at the back? Yes.
So the work that I do is obviously at a different scale. So the question around sustainability is really, do we have a public transport in place? Do we have public transport in place? Are our roads doing the right thing? Do we have an infrastructure system that's been that is able to deal with the capacity of the growth of a city, etc. So when you enter some of these cities that haven't been investing in that infrastructure for the last 20 to 30 years, there's undeniable basic problems that you could sort of tie into a conversation about the future of that city, which you do immediately, which means what will it be like in the next 20 or 30 years. So the sustainability discussion is slightly different, and the client, the city or the public, is not necessarily recalcitrant. They need a solution, and so that solution, unfortunately, is a significant cost. Now we're able to integrate a lot more thinking about green infrastructure, employing open space to deal with water management and flooding, as we've done and surprisingly in some places in Saudi Arabia. We're dealing with the public investment again in areas where recovery of costs may not have been the prime issue around public transport. So I think the conversation around sustainability is, sure, on the one level you have the buildings piece where you can talk about renewables, you can talk about bits and pieces, but on the city level it's a very big conversation, and there's a UK and a mature city conversation, as well as a conversation around the cities that are emerging which are, you know, the majority of the population around the world, and how we deal with conditions to leapfrog knowledge so that the problems that may exist in the more mature cities are in some way eradicated. So it's another conversation in some way. It's not the classic sustainable or not sustainable, renewable or not renewable.
Lydia.
And just quickly with regards to renewables, we were at the event last night and Zach Goldsmith was talking, and one of the things that he introduced around renewables was that Bristol as a city, the council leader there has actually opened up all of the roofs that are owned by the council and the leadership to renewable energies, so PVs for community energy, and I think that's something that as a model might be able to be developed across the rest of the UK, but I think it's early stages, but there are aspects happening. And one of the things around the Sustainia 100, and particularly Sustainia Cities 100, is actually them bringing out the examples of where the renewables is working, and how, as you mentioned, about the leapfrogging of technology, so that we're not having wires everywhere across all of the new cities that are emerging. But I think it's still something that needs to be addressed.
I want to hone back in on leadership before we close up, because we've got 5 minutes or so. I want to ask you each, if you had one specific insight or piece of advice that you wanted to share with people, observation, what have you, around what constitutes leadership for sustainability or for transformational change or what have you. Doesn't matter if it's industry level, organization, individual, what would it be? Can I start with you, Rab?
Probably objectivity. I think if you're in our position as architects and you're putting forward ideas which are architecturally driven, you've got to be honest with yourself, you've got to be objective about the analysis of those ideas, and you can't kid the team or the client as to where it's going. So the ideas have got to add up, but if you're proposing something that isn't quite perfect, you should say so. It's all right. You can still push and make things better through transparency and an objective analysis of how things perform. And I find one of the most frustrating things about our industry is all the bullshit that's going around about it performs this way and that way, and all of it. A lot of it's nonsense, and the figures are massaged, and we don't get post-occupancy figures and all the rest of it. We need to be objective about how our buildings are performing. Incidentally, one little point about renewables, which I can't resist. On one of the jobs I showed you, the Winchester refurbishment, we persuaded a client not to spend a lot of money on renewables, because it was hugely expensive, but to spend the equivalent amount of money on saving far more carbon by investing in the fabric of the building itself. Yeah. Yeah. So you've got to keep renewables in context. It's not a panacea.
Okay, thank you. Objectivity was
I would
that one?
say positivity. I would say a lot of these things are seen by fear or negative. If you look at the arguments about Brexit, it is a lot about fear and negativity, and I actually think you can be positive about sustainability. Don't look at it as some sort of tax or some sort of regulation. See it as how can you make your buildings better and more enjoyable, more sustainable with a capital S and a small s, more lettable, more valuable. I mean, if you look at our assets, they've done very well, and they've done very well because people like being in the buildings. They like it and enjoy it, and they are sustainable with the proper meaning of the word, or the full meaning of the word. So I would say embrace positivity and then look at how they're used, because too many developers are just use it as one-off, and I've got my certificate and I'll move on, and actually you need a responsibility in maintaining it.
Okay, nice one. Thank you.
Probably principles and objectivity, I think, and combining both. So first principles, understanding what they are and what the consequences are, even though there are always unintended consequences, anything that we do, particularly at the larger scale, but really having a good grounding, and then everything else is layered on top, so knowledge, data, information.
Great, thank you. Lydia?
So from a leadership perspective, it's about that commitment and contribution from a leader that they really want the change to happen. The 86% of the leaders in the survey undertaken by the UK Green Building Council says that those leaders believe that it's of moral imperative to address climate change and address the issues raised around sustainability. So actually, those leaders conveying that message to their employees, to the industry, is crucial. And one final thing just about the renewables. I think that whilst there's a drive to get renewables on buildings and in developments. I think one of the other drivers that we have as an industry is to actually push for renewable energy to be delivered to our buildings, and I think that's one initiative that's working really well, is actually, and we're delivering at King's Cross, is making sure that 100% of the energy that is coming to provide power for our buildings is clean and green energy, and that's one thing that can start driving change as well.
Great. I'm very conscious we're out of time. Some fantastic leadership insights there from our panel. We at UK-GBC, as Lydia mentioned, have done a number of surveys, continue to bring current and future leaders together, and leadership continues to be right at the top of our agenda. So for now, please join me in thanking our panelists and enjoy the rest of Ecobuild. Thank you very much.